Hi, I'm Angela Ricketts. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I am a proud mom. I have 3 children. My middle child is a boy, and we found out our son was diagnosed at age 5, and he's 14 right now. So when I think back on when Kai was first diagnosed, we knew in our family that there was an eye disease that existed. But at that time during my, childhood, into my adulthood, we didn't see it repeat itself. My grandfather, my mom's dad, was told he had RP. He did go blind. And so our son was having therapy. He was doing OT, speech, and physical therapy. And one day he was at physical therapy, and one day he was at physical therapy, and the physical therapist pulled me aside and said, "Has he had an eye exam?" And I said, "No." "Why?" And she said, "When I'm working with him in his peripheral, he's overextending." She goes, "Almost like he can't see it at all." And my stomach sunk, and that's when I realized he had this eye disease. So my initial reaction to the disease, I experienced grief. I was very sad. It was overwhelming. I felt alone. Just a real isolated feeling because what he did have was so rare. It wasn't a normal conversation that I could have with a mom on a playground. Someone that would say, "Yeah, I've been there." How much time do we have? I could go on and on about how awesome this organization is. Actually, when our son was first diagnosed as having something, they weren't sure what it was. And it took a year to get those test results back for genetic testing. So I had gone up to a conference in Chicago, and I ran into this Dr. Gam. And I was the crazy mom that brought my son's retina photos and my retina photos. And I said, "What does this look like to you?" And he said, "I don't know, but here's my card. And when you do get the test results," he goes, "reach back out to me." And this is how cool this organization is. I reached out to Dr. Gam in the evening, and by the next day at like 6:30 in the morning, I get an email back. And Dr. Gam connected me to Corey and Eric. Yes. And shortly after that, I was on the phone calls with both of them, receiving amazing hope. And I remember Corey, I will always remember this, brings me such joy. He says to me, "So there's a really tough thing." And I'm like waiting for it, like, right, pins and needles, like, what? And he's like, "It's really hard." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, most of the guys that have this are good looking and no good beer." And I'm like, this is great. Like, you're crying and then you're laughing. And you actually get to talk firsthand to someone that has been through it, someone that understands it, someone that's able to help me understand it as a mom. I might not get it in the way of, physically losing my vision, but it's allowed me to understand my son better, and to understand what he might be experiencing, and also understand his worries, his anxieties, his fears, about what the future may bring. So it's just been a lot of hope. My son currently is 14, so we are in the thick of adolescence. So to add this on top, it's been a lot. When I share with people his progression, it's different than some of the kids that are 14. My son is extremely night blind. He has lost a lot of peripheral, and, he's finally at a point, which is kind of cool because he can kind of share, like, hey mom, this is like my visual field. Everything else looks like I can see it, but it's like getting out into like out of a steamy shower, right? You know that something's there, but it's not really clear. And so we see a lot of the tripping, the falling, the not being able to find the dog, but the dog's right there, right? And I think it's a lot for him to process as a 14-year-old. And my son does receive orientation and mobility. So he is learning, he's very proficient in, utilizing a cane, particularly because of the nighttime vision. And, as of now, we go to the same places, so you pretty much memory map that stuff. But anything else outside of that, it gets complicated and confusing. And for our son, I want him to be able to, go away to school and navigate a college campus and, go out with friends, take someone out on a date and have the skills necessary to make that happen. And so for us, I know later on, a lot of guys, decide or don't decide to use the tools depending on where they're at. But for our son, he's more impacted. And so it's definitely been a lot on him. And he was supposed to come actually to the conference, and at 9:00 the night before, he was like a no-go. And so even though we were like, you don't even have to go to the conference, dad can take you on the roller coasters. It's just it's too real. It's too raw. And I get it. I think there's a power in numbers, right? Sometimes we think that we're just sitting on our own, and no one possibly could understand this. And it becomes very isolating, lonely. And I think when you show up for yourself and you show up with other individuals, there's something that happens. And it's just like an energy, where all of a sudden you're hearing your same struggle, or you're experiencing, what someone else is feeling. And I think that's why, it is important that these organizations exist, because, what I was sharing earlier in that room, when I left for one of these conferences and my son asked me, can these doctors fix me? And I told him no, because you're not broken. But that these doctors and these researchers, they show up every day, and they have for so long. And it doesn't matter the outcome, if it's a win or if it's a loss. Every day it's really a win, because they're still back in it. They wake up to do the same thing over and over again. And so, to hear from these doctors and researchers that this community, this organization that exists, where their motivation, they're our motivation, right? And the men that have continued to stay in this and that started it a long time ago, and that show up at these conferences, and their hope is for themselves. But I've also heard that their hope is that it ends in my son's lifetime. To hear that hope as a mom, and to be able to go home and share that with my son when he's having a hard day and he says, no one understands. And I say, I don't understand, but there's individuals that do, and there's individuals that are going to help solve it. It's coming. I would give, if there were any advice that I would give to families that just found out about our organization and finally want to get involved, or families that just received a new diagnosis and are welcomed into to the CHM family, because they end up being your family. I think it would be just giving yourself some grace and patience during this whole process, because everyone is doing it differently. Some families are sharing it early, some aren't. Some are using white canes, some aren't. And I think for a long time, I kind of struggled, like, like how much do you share? Do you not share? And the thing is with my son, he's going to appointments. It's like, it couldn't even have been a secret, right? It's very obvious. But I don't think there's any right path, because I think right when you feel like I can't cry about it anymore, and you are so filled with hope, something happens and there's a shift, there's a change. Right now my son's changes, he's like, I don't know if I'm going to actually be able to drive at 16, even though we're like, go for it. My husband's going to teach him. But I think he's also verbalizing what he's seeing that we don't see, right? So, again, that hits you as a parent, and all of a sudden, So I was sharing, even in the CHM family group yesterday, that, I remember when we first got diagnosed, we jumped in, we got involved, we fundraised, all of it, right? And then outside of all of this, life's happening. You've got family members sick, passing away and stuff. And so then it's like this pause of life, because you don't really have. And so it's kind of like, there's no right path, right? So it's really easy to look at people and say, wow, you're doing this, you're doing that. But they take periods off too. And that's okay. So I think it's just, at the end of the day, just trusting this whole process and giving yourself grace, and also just knowing that there's hope every day. And, and not every day is going to be great, but really to take it every day, one day at a time. Saving sight is our vision, and building hope is how we get there. Join us today, donate today at curechm.org.